Conventional wisdom at the state capitol is that any problem can benefit from more money, but with necessity being the mother of invention, is it possible that budget constraints in Albany could actually produce creative solutions that don't cost more? That's the pitch from our next guest, Rob Kent, who served as general counsel to the State Office of Addiction Services and Supports and now runs his own consulting firm focused on drug policy and is making the case that the state has an opportunity to lower costs without losing a step in its effort to provide addiction care. Thanks for making the time, Rob, and welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So you made the case in an op-ed for the Times-Union that the State Office of Addiction Services and Supports, known as OASIS, could use the expected tough state budget negotiations in 2026 to update their staffing rules in a way that won't add to the budget and will address what you describe as a staffing crisis. Before we get into the solution, what is the problem facing addiction care providers and their staff?
So the problem stems from the fact that the system is under-resourced. It always has been, even when we got additional funds and supports during the raging part of the opioid overdose epidemic. It's still underfunded. And then, so if you were to stratify healthcare in terms of workforce and compensation, nursing homes, hospitals pay way better salaries, have far better benefits, have more employees. Mental health falls in behind them. Developmental disabilities is actually above mental health. And then go down a number of rungs, and that's where the addiction workforce is. So the rates of reimbursement have not been adequate. The funding available through the OASIS system has not been adequate. So you end up in a situation where providers just can't compete in the marketplace to find people and to keep people. And one of the other sort of aggravating factors is that the overdose epidemic, opioids, they're lethal, but they're also terribly effective in really capturing the person. And so these are hard folks to work with. So it's hard work. You don't get paid a lot. There might not be significant health benefits offered by your employer. And so it leads. I have some clients in New York, providers, that have upwards of 20% vacancies in full-time employee positions.
Well, on its face, that scenario you just laid out sort of screams for more money, but you've made the case in this op-ed that changes to staffing rules could potentially help stabilize some of the state budget costs and begin to maybe address some of these problems that have caused by historic underfunding. So what are some of the rule changes that could make a difference?
Yeah, just for some context, so that as the system's under-resourced, underfunded, it's also become terribly good at stretching the dollar as far as it can. And so, timing's everything, or it isn't. And in this instance, it really took as a good sign that the budget director, rightfully so, we don't know what's happening necessarily with enough certainty from federal funding for Medicaid and SNAP and other programs. So there could be significant reductions in funding for the federal government to the states. And so if we can't, introduce new revenue into the system, how do we maybe stretch the dollar even more? And so I start with this premise that I believe, and I wrote most of the rules that are now in place at the OASIS system when I was general counsel. And I believe, well, first off, they were written in the ideal. We want the highest of educated folks, the highest trained individuals in these positions when we can afford it. And we're not in the circumstances we're in, but we're not right now. And so stretch the dollar by letting folks who are qualified to do this work, they work in the system now, maybe do more than they're currently allowed. And I think that can be done without compromising patient safety. And, I've raised a number of examples throughout some of the writings and talks that I've been giving. And there's been questions as simple as, can certain nurse practitioners do physical exams in a program? And we've actually sorted that one out. Well, we've gotten enough information from state ed department and from OASIS to be comfortable to advise providers that they can use, for instance, a psychiatric nurse practitioner to do physical examinations. Although, believe it or not, that was an open question a couple months ago. So that's that. It's the case acts that the folks who work in the system are credentialed alcoholism and substance abuse counselors. We rewrote the rules to try to stratify it, where folks with higher level college degrees could be placed at a different level. You need thousands of hours to get the credential. I think we need to think about that right now, because you can't find the staff to work in the programs, the peers that are certified that work in the system. Some of them can't literally afford to pay the hundreds of dollars to get the certification. And then without it, they can't do certain work that's reimbursable in the system, allowing expanded use of telehealth. In a perfect world, all the right staff's in a building all the right times. It's just not realistic. I know from working with providers, you can't find the staff who are willing to accept what you offer to work in these programs. And so if we can't make do with what we have, let's change what we have to make do with the money we have. And again, I believe this is possible. I've been around this system almost 20 years. I know the folks who work in it are good people. They're in it for the right reasons. Many of them are in recovery themselves, and they understand what it means to help others find that. And so I just think if the governor, through her budget director, is throwing out this opportunity, we really, really, really need to take advantage of it, especially given the system is in a
Sure.
tough place financially going in.
Is there reason to believe that in some situations, if we were to update the rules and regulations, they might just be catching up with what is already happening on the ground? Is there reason to believe that people are already going beyond maybe what they're licensed to do and are providing certain care and functions that you're looking to update so that it kind of reflects reality?
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that they are. You have to make do with what you have and who walks through the door looking to work for you. One of the other aspects for the OASIS system that I think is helpful is you don't have to go through permanent rulemaking changes. They have authority in their rules to waive regulations and for a time limited period. So this could be done, say, for the next year. And so that we haven't changed the whole system. We waive certain rules. We see what the impact was. Ideally, either the circumstances change financially where we can do better, or we put them in place as permanent rulemakings. I mean, from being a veteran of the Albany scene, it's become rulemakings almost as difficult as legislating, and that's saying a whole heck of a lot.
Well, you mentioned an important point, though. You would monitor how it goes. Do we have the capacity as a system right now, if we were to make changes, if we were to expand scope of practice, to adequately assess what the ramifications are, maybe in a real-time basis or a near real-time basis, to assess, okay, this is something that we can do without diminishing quality, or maybe, nope, we were wrong. This definitely drops quality. We got to go back to the stricter rules.
Yeah, and that's why the waiver approach makes sense, because you could end it right away. But one of the things I will say, because it was implemented when I was at OASIS, the Justice Center oversight over the OASIS system monitors all incidents now that occur. Every provider has to report every significant incident, including abuse and neglect, to the Justice Center and OASIS. So if we saw something starting to occur, we can change it right away. The other thing I would say is, I'll go back to the fact that folks who work in the system, folks who run programs, don't want to harm people. So they're not going to do things that they don't feel are safe. They're just going to have to make do under the current rules if that's what they have to do. So I think there's enough checks, including just the integrity of the folks who run programs, that if something wasn't working, you can change it, you can end it.
And in terms of actually implementing something like what you're talking about, changing rules, changing regulations, changing, kind of what the day-to-day procedures look like, is this something where the Hochul administration has broad enough latitude, or are they going to have to look across the street to the state education department for some authority, because they are usually loath to make any changes to licensure, and maybe it would require the state lawmakers to get involved?
Well, I've dealt with scope of practice issues my whole career in Albany, and you're spot on with the state ed department. They're just so understanding of the real world. Not so. I wouldn't look to them for help, but I think there are enough things that the Hochul administration can do within their own rules. I do think there are some scope of practice issues, by the way, that cut across the fields and across systems. And maybe that is a place for something as part of this relief package that the governor has, wants to put forward in her budget. Put it forward in the budget. As you know, that, if nothing else, is the easiest way to generate a conversation on an issue.
And lastly, while I've got you, is there anything you do want to see in terms of funding, maybe something that is a upfront cost but will have long time benefits or long term savings, anything like that that we should be thinking about in the context of a budget where not only are they going to be asked to look at rules and regulations, but they're also going to be looking to control costs?
Well, can I offer a couple?
You can offer 2 minutes worth.
Okay. First is I would keep New Yorkers in New York State for treatment, both in the Medicaid system and state employees. I'm working on an issue right now where the state Empire Plan picked the Center of Excellence for Addiction Treatment as Betty Ford Hazleton in Minnesota. No New York programs. And then we've seen comptroller reports about Medicaid participants going out of state for treatment. That's a real easy way to generate revenue in the system. It's already in the system. It would go to New York State providers who pay taxes in New York, are regulated. And then the other piece is spend the settlement money. New York keeps, like, I don't know what they're doing, waiving the whatever.
And for listeners, this is the Opioid Settlement Fund Advisory Board recommended money from settlements with distributors and manufacturers of opioids.
Well, so in the Division of Budget just released a mid-year fiscal report. It shows a balance projected at the end of this fiscal year of $300 million. What are you sitting on the money for? We've got all these issues. Spend the money. Spend it now. Don't wait. And that's part of it. With we have to do a whole show on the settlement funds because there's no transparency. And look, at some point, I might be back talking to you because I've got a bunch of folks who are now litigants in a suit against New York State on the settlement funds because they're not being used appropriately and they're not being spent, which is more irksome.
Well, you did it in under 2 minutes, so thank you. We've been speaking with Rob Kent. He previously served as general counsel to the State Office of Addiction Services and Supports and now runs his own consulting shop. Rob, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, David.
Thanks for listening to today's edition of the Capitol Press Room. For an insider take on what's happening in state government, check out our Dispatches from Planet Albany show, available wherever you get podcasts or at capitolpressroom.org.
Join us again for Capitol Press Room, a production of WCNY Connected, Syracuse.